take-home messages at the end of the session. What I wanted to do was to put them up at the start, because these are the sort of things that I want to take through and just explore with people and provide some sort of basis for where I wanted to end up. And so the four take-home messages that I want to talk about is: one, don't look at Lyme in isolation. Prioritise paddocks for the most cost-effective returns. Don't rely upon Lyme to release nutrients, but use Lyme to reduce the effects of aluminium. And they're the sort of things I'd like you to sort of take, hopefully you'll take away from this talk. And what I want to do now is just to go through and just explore those issues as part of this talk. So when you talk to people and you look at what's written about it and stuff like that, there's a whole lot of things that are put out as things that Lyme will do. And one of them is, well, if you put Lyme on, it'll improve, but don't have to get a response, it'll improve animal production. Have people heard that? Yeah, so Lyme's good. Just put Lyme on and you'll get an animal response. So what happens when you test that? So we have got some data that we can have a look at. There were, at the time when they used to do grazing trials, New Zealand ran about 7 of them in the 60s, 70s, where they looked at the effect of Lyme on animal production, and what they found was that Lyme had no effect on stock performance, but couldn't be attributed to either an increase in available dry matter or increased feed quality through changes in composition. Lardner Lyme trial of the 1960s, down near Warragul, they split a dairy farm because, again, dairy farmers were concerned, saying, well, we're not getting responses in our pastures, but we're sure we're getting a response in our animals. They split a dairy farm, split the herd, evened it up, ran it for 2 years. At 2 years, they hadn't got a response. No response in pasture, no response in animals or animal health or production. So, and it was a site where you wouldn't expect to get a pasture response. So to me, and I know people say they get responses, but I think that what we need to be doing is looking at whether or not we've affected that, the amount of dry matter we got, or we've changed the composition, because that seems to be, or that what the evidence says is that's what actually drives the animal response to Lyme. Now, the other one is that comes up is that everybody talks about Lyme and nutrient availability, releases molybdenum, phosphorus, aluminium, manganese, boron. Now, most of you, I think, will have seen a graph like this at some stage in the past. Okay. What do you take away from that graph?
pH 7.
pH 7. You should be aiming for pH 7. That's what it's saying, isn't it? Is that what it's saying? So everything's really sort of hunky-dory. It's a sweet spot. I reckon that graph has been responsible for the biggest misallocation of resources in agriculture, or one of the big misallocations of resource in agriculture that we've had. I mean, does anybody believe that phosphorus is complete? Sorry, this is water pH. So does anybody really believe we've got absolutely no phosphorus available if our pH is down at 5? Quite happily get phosphate responses at 5. That one I think is seriously wrong, and I'll talk about that. Aluminium's not in there. Molybdenum, I'll talk about that one too, and I think there's certainly some validity in that. The problem was this was done in liquid culture, done in the 20s, wasn't done in soils. But it's got into the sort of the folklore of agriculture, if you like, and it drives a lot of decisions. I mean, I've spoken to people who say because of a graph like this, they want to lime the soil to get it up to a particular point before they even consider putting fertiliser on. Now that is a really that creates a real misallocation of resources. The other thing is that it ignores is that if you are getting increased availability through Lyme, what's the relative cost of getting it through Lyme as opposed to actually putting the nutrient on? So let's look at Lyme effect on pH, Lyme effect on phosphorus release. You look at the literature, dodgy, really inconsistent results. Some of the data I've looked at, a trial with 96 treatments, 7 responses, 7 depressions, the rest of them no effect. But what the conclusion, and I guess the conclusion that came out of that series of trials, was that lime increases clover yield on aluminium toxic soils only if applied with phosphorus fertiliser. So if you've got a low pH, a low phosphorus soil, don't rely upon lime to crank the phosphorus up. It's not going to work. You've got to do both things. Molly, this is a Molly response. That's 200 kilograms of super, no super, 200 kilograms of super and Molly. Now, a lot of the early trials were for lime, gave responses, and they were shown to be molybdenum responses. When they put molybdenum on, they didn't get the lime response. So the question is it cheaper to get the molybdenum response by putting on lime, if you don't need it, or by putting on molybdenum? And invariably, it's molybdenum. It's buying the molybdenum. The other one I said was that I think that graph is seriously wrong when it starts looking at boron. This is from an acid soil, and if you had a look at it as you put lime on with that particular graph up there, boron's hunky-dory right down to 5.5, maximum availability again at 7. Boron's a bit of a sleeper, I think, in the system. Trial it out of Yass on some acid soils. No boron and no boron. With no boron, bugger all seed yield. Put some boron on, you crank the seed yield up, but no difference in plant production. And so boron's a sleeper. If you put lime on, you might know you're having an effect on your seed yield and clover seed yield. But that's what happens when you put lime on. The seed yield actually plummets, and you're now starting to get an impact on plant yield. So, not everything is released as you put lime on. And boron deficiency is an issue in the lighter soils and Gippsland, certainly through the northeast. And I suspect anywhere you've got some lighter sort of soils around the coast, it's likely to be an issue. And it's a bit of a trap that you need to watch out for. And there are a range of other things like improved nodulation survival. That's true. It certainly supplies calcium, but I'm not too sure you'd be doing that for that reason. I'm only aware of one situation where we've had a calcium response in pastures, and that was in seed production in clover. Releasing nitrogen through mineralisation of organic matter, and that's one that can occur and sort of trick you a bit. You break down the organic matter, you get an immediate sort of greening off of the pasture. Doesn't last long, but it gives you a bit of a kick as the pasture and the soil organic matter responds. But then the other one is that's always put out is that, well, you can use the correct calcium-magnesium ratios. And whether that's feasible or not, I won't go into, but let's just have a look at whether or not it's worthwhile doing that. The original work on calcium-magnesium ratios was done where somebody used a pretty acid soil and then they applied calcium as lime and then looked at the plant response. Now, what they didn't do was to sort out the pH response as opposed to the calcium response. But that was the sort of basis of why this stuff's got into the literature. Again, if you look at the research, and I've only got one trial data up here, go from a calcium-magnesium ratio of 2.3 to 8, there is no trend, there's no response. So it's not, from my perspective, in terms of the amount of calcium or magnesium you got there, particularly say magnesium, it's not the ratio, it's how much you've got. And if it's too low, it's too low, irrespective of what the ratio is. So that takes me to the one where I think that as grass growers, pasture growers, we should be focusing on, and that really is looking at the effect of lime to reduce aluminium. And for the sort of things that we grow, we've got a whole range of different sensitivities. Barley, lucerne, put canola up there right at the top end. So, really important to get aluminium out of the system if you want to grow that stuff. Get down to the sort of moderately tolerant stuff. We can put up with a bit of aluminium because they'll grow at a reasonable, a sort of a moderate level of aluminium. And what happens, and this is just a bit of Phalaris, that what aluminium does, it really just stunts root growth. And that means that The plants can't pick up phosphorus, they can't pick up nutrients. Nutrients have got to come to them. And often what you find if you're looking at an aluminium toxic plant, it's got the symptoms of phosphate deficiency, stunted and purple. So we have some broad threshold effects levels for the effect of aluminium on pasture species. Lucerne's affected above 5, Phalaris above 10, subclover above 15, ryegrass, above about 20. So we know the point at which that stuff's going to come on. How far you go above that and reduce it, yeah, individual decision. But one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that this is the relationship between pH along here and aluminium up there. A bit of scatter, but what you can see is if you trend that line down, basically you've got no aluminium in the system once you get to 5. So if you want to keep aluminium out of the system completely, if you want to grow one of those very sensitive things, operating at 5's pretty good. If you, and we'd all love to be operating it there, but if you've got Phalaris, or sorry, if you're growing subclover, you could be operating at that sort of level of aluminium and probably doing quite okay.
Subsoil or topsoil?
That's topsoil. Yeah. So the question was, that as topsoil or subsoil? That was a topsoil. So, people have different ways of recommending or putting in their logic for using lime. And I'll just run through the system that I use. So the first thing that I'll look at the pH and I'll particularly the aluminium. Sorry, I'll look at the pH to start with. Because of that graph before, if it's above 5, I'd say, we're not going to have a problem. I'll come back to that one later. If it's 4.3, then I think that there's a long-term issue in running soils at that pH. And part of the reason for that is that all our farming systems are acidifying, and so they'll just gradually wind and grind the stuff down over time. And what happens is that most of us are on this sort of system here where we're adding acid to the soil, and the way the soil is responding is to push out aluminium. And the way it's doing that is to actually break down and release it from clay particles. So operating at low pHs for a long time can have a detrimental effect on your soil structure and soil composition, clay particles, clay mineralogy. That's what I'm saying, that if you're at that 5.3 thing, it's pretty desirable that you get out of it. So let's go back to that middle range, and let's just consider, now let's have a look at the aluminium. So if it's significantly above the critical species level for the species, yep, liming. If you want to grow those things, you're going to have to put lime on. If you're above it, well, fine. Liming not essential at this stage. Monitor the pH and will drop down over time, and the aluminium will go up. And then if it's slightly above the critical level, well, it's desirable, but you need to think about it, where you're going to spend the dollars and where that's going to be in the short term the best benefit, or whether there's other alternatives you need to consider. So if we want to correct lime, want to correct pH, there are two factors that influence the rate that you apply of lime. The first one is the texture. So you can see there, if we're moving here from 4 to 4.3, the sand needs about half the amount that the loam needs. But if we take it up to the next section, so from 4.3 to 4.7, we don't need as much. And that's just to do with the way the pH scale works. But so now we only need 1 tonne as opposed to 2.4. And then obviously it just keeps going up. The higher you go up, the higher the sort of the part of the scale that you want to change, the less you need. So you just need to take that into consideration if you're trying to change your pH. And where you want to get to, you're going to need more of the loam side of it and less of the sand, and less per change of unit as you move up. could spend a lot of time talking about lime quality factors, but fundamentally, there are three factors that you need to consider. One is that the amount of lime in the product, and that's the amount of calcium or magnesium carbonate. Both of those are liming materials. The fineness of the product. Generally, anything that's pretty gritty is not going to be effective. Anything that's, feels like a bit of sand, it's going to take a long time to break down. So the fineness the better, provided you can spread it. And then the other thing is that there's a bit of a difference between the types of lime that you have. So dolomitic limes, for example, are far more resistant to breaking down. So if you want to have the same level of effectiveness, they've got to be ground finer. The soft limes, things like your coral limes that you get around the coast, they actually break down quicker because when you look at them under the microscope, they're really jagged. There's a lot more surface area to help them break down. So what you should be able to do if you're going to put lime on is to talk to your supplier and get from him that what they call that effective neutralising value, which is a combination of fineness and a combination of the amount of liming material that's in the product. What you then need to do is that if something's only 50% effective, you're going to need twice the amount. And so then you can do some sort of comparison in terms of what it's going to cost you to get that effective amount of lime on the system. And there can be big differences for products that might seem the same or be the same price. And just before I throw it open to questions, can I just, let's imagine this is your farm. You've got, whatever, 10 paddocks, you've sampled them all the same size. A limited budget, all have limited budgets. What's the priority paddock? So somebody said this one. Who say that's the priority paddock? Yep, 1, 2. Okay. Anybody else want to nominate one?
Third and fifth.
Third and fifth. So that one and that one.
Yeah, one.
That one.
Yeah.
Third and fifth. Okay. What about other people? Oh, Webby, what did you do?
Well, this is a trick question.
Remember, you've got a limited amount of money.
The second first and second.
What, and often you can blow all your money on one paddock. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you work down where you had the least amount of input per paddock to fix it? So even though, this sort of stands out and says, oh, it's acid, I've got to fix it. I reckon your best return on investment in the initial stages is really working your way around these where you only need to put one thing into the system to fix it. So what you leave this for a year or 2 years? It's been like that. It's been like that for bloody 10 or 15 or 20 years. Another couple of years not going to make much difference. But hopefully if you've cranked up these sort of paddocks, you've then got some capacity to then reinvest back in these ones. So again, what I'm saying is that, you've got to keep this thing about where you spend your money in perspective. Love to put the lime on, but you've got to use to generate money, and I reckon you'll generate more money by fixing up your low phosphorus ones here, because that's the only thing you need to do. And then save this, keep a watch on it, but fix it up once you've got a bit more of the other stuff going and you can justify it in an economic sense. What do people think about that?
So you're not going to put lime on?
Sorry? So the question was, I wouldn't put... No. Yeah, only putting phosphorus on these ones. So...
Your question was...
Sorry?
Your question was, where would you put lime?
No. Where would you spend the money? Where would you spend them? Sorry? Did I say lime? Oh, they've taped it so I can check.
Jim, what about when you're talking about species, using the new Phalaris such as Vance AT?
Yep.
Which is acetylene, so is that going to assist you in helping?
Yeah, so the question was something like Advance AT, which has got acid tolerance assist. Yeah, it would, provided you can manage it. It's not suitable to set stocking. So again, you've got to consider that. If you can't set stock it, work your way around, lime the other paddock, and then put on something like a GT. So anyway, look, just to go back to those take-home messages, and hopefully what I've tried to do in this talk is to say, look, don't look at lime in isolation. Assess your limiting factors. Prioritise paddocks for most cost-effective returns. It may mean leaving some of the most acid paddocks to last. Don't rely upon lime to release nutrients. Generally, there are cheaper alternatives, and it's very difficult to predict, particularly for things like phosphorus. But really concentrate on using lime to reduce the effects of aluminium for the sort of stuff that you want to grow in your pastures. And happy to take questions, comments.
Economic sense is more on the only one that is potentially, irrespective of the cost of putting the lime on. Are there any other side effects for over-applying lime?
Any side effects from over-applying lime? Other than the cost? I think within the limits where most people would be putting lime on, no, I don't think there is. It's just that boron is particularly sensitive to it.
So the old recommendation, which we've been offering on for years, is you bung it on 2.5 tonnes a hectare every 10 years. We just subject to soil test, obviously.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you've got we do have some feels about how quickly soils will acidify, and sort of in the, if you've got perennials in the system, they'll acidify slower. If you only got annuals and subclover, they'll acidify quicker. Yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on the farming system, Webby, about how fast it's acidifying and stuff like that. On a perennial-based pasture, I'd expect you should be able to go longer than that. For an annual-based pasture or a cropping soil, you've probably got to go tighter because of the acidifying effects of the fertiliser.
I just put a tonne on back in the late 80s of the long stuff, and you say it doesn't work, but it was absolute magic. But it was always called Geelong potash lime, and it was 6 to 8% potash.
Yeah.
That it was probably the potash. And gee, it was remarkable.
Yeah, there's a question about potash lime, which was just come out of Geelong. Great product, yeah, can't get it. But and it may very well have been the potash, and it was a really cost-effective way of getting some potash on if you had to put the lime on. Yep, no, agree. Yep.
Efficacy, excuse me, depth.
Yep.
How quickly does it fade as it moves through?
If you put lime on the surface, and the speed with which it moves down is going to depend upon the rate that you put on it. Webby can testify to this. We got lime down on his place down to 7 centimetres in 2 years, just from a surface application.
Sandy sort of lime.
Sorry?
Sandy sort of lime.
No, you're clay lime. Yeah. They used to say it moved very slowly, but that was because they looked at lime movement over a 60-year period. Okay.
Could I add something there? This is potash lime too. That was one of its big drawbacks. It went down very quickly.
Did it? Yeah.
It's very funny. When you dump it, it'd run like water. It'd run for 50 metres.
Yeah.
And it'd just sink into the soil so quickly that you'd get a 2 or 3 year effect, and then bang. It's just...
Now, you might have run out of potash.
What's potash do like?
Potash. Potash is, again, one of those essential nutrients. Clovers need more of it than grasses. And you'll particularly see it in hay paddocks, deficiencies like that. Drive around in spring and have a look for paddocks that have got dandelions in them. Right? Because low potash pastures are open, they've got dandelions in them, clovers are patchy in it. So, and you'll pull a lot of potash out with hay cutting, you'll pull a lot of potash out in a paddock where you've got sheep, because they'll be moving it from the bottom of the paddock to the top of the paddock. So, yeah, it's an essential one. It's a very common deficiency through a lot of the area. And so if you are checking potash deficiency, don't check the top of the paddock.
Yeah, Jim, could you just comment on the reason we got the response, I think, was because of those earthworms. The massive earthworm activity where the lime had been put out.
Yep.
I mean, that would be the reason I put mine out, basically, to encourage that. I mean, have you seen, has that been replicated anywhere else?
Sorry, this was a trial site that we had at David's in mid-90s, early 90s, where we had 3 paddocks, one that had lime plus 400 kilograms of super potash, one that had 400 kilograms of super potash, one that had, it had 100 weight of super potash.
Oh, did we?
Yes, we did. You told me you did. So we ran that for a number of years, and that was useful because we got up to, I think, 23 DSE per hectare or something like that over a 3-year period. But what we did with the control paddock was we then whacked everything on a little section, and when we created the environment, it was pretty acid. So, the earthworm activity was really quite spectacular in that area where we put the lime. They just went crazy, but they had the nutrients, they had everything. So, but as a matter, it was getting everything right. Yeah. But they did go crazy. Yeah.
So have you seen that replicated
No.
anywhere?
No. Sorry. Unique. Yeah. But there was a question in the previous meeting just about the effect on biology, and anything that makes plants grow, that provides food for bacteria or fungi or worms or whatever, you're going to change the balance anyway. So I think it's just a nice little cycle that you get the pasture growing well, you'll have good soil biology and you'll have good production of animals.